Chord embellishment is the process of adding color to any major, minor, or dominant seventh chord quality. And the color tones, which are called tensions, are derived from the major scale of the chord that you want to embellish. For example, if we were going to embellish a C7th chord or a C major or C minor, the tones would be below the octave, the 6th and 7th. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and above the octave 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Now, you'll notice when we get to 8, that's the root, that's the octave. The 9 is the same as 2, the 10 is the same as 3, the 11th is the same as 4, the 12th, which we never call 12, is the same as 5, and the 6 is the same as 13. So we have tones 6 and 7 below the octave, and extensions 9, 11, and 13 above the octave. And also alterations, chromatic alterations of either the 5th, the 9th, the 11th, for example, an augmented 11th, a sharp 5, a flat 9, or a flat 13. Those are the tensions that we can use on any of the chord qualities. We're going to start with the dominant 7th quality first, because it really is the most embellishable of all chords, because it's a chord of motion. It wants to go somewhere, more than major and minor chords do. Now, the formulas for these embellishments you will find in Lesson 10, and they really do eventually have to be memorized, because they're how you embellish the chord. That's the process that you use. But it's important to realize that you don't need all of the tones of the chord formula to imply the chord sound. As a matter of fact, it's not even desirable to have all the tones. Many times, a highly embellished chord sound can be implied by just 3 or 4 notes. That's one of the reasons a jazz player can play a melodic line and comp chords in the background, because he's implying these chord sounds. Of course, you have to know what notes you can omit and what notes you can leave in. Surprisingly, you can omit more notes than you would think. The most commonly omitted tones are the root and the 5th. The only time you would need to have the 5th in it is if the 5th is specified in the chord symbol. For example, dominant 7, sharp 5, or flat 5. Then you would not be able to take the 5th out. But otherwise, say if it's a 13th chord or a 9th chord, and the 5th isn't mentioned, you don't need the 5th, and you don't need the root. Well, let's start with a dominant 7th chord, very popular form. The most frequently used form for a 13th is with the root in the bass, and also second inversion, 5th in the bass. We're going to look at those shapes right now. Here's a dominant 7th chord. I have the root, the flat 7, the 3, and the 5. Now the formula for the 13th is root, 3rd, 5th, flatted 7th, 9th, and the 13th. Now, I said you don't need all of those tones. Sometimes they're not available. Just looking at what I have here, I have the root, I have the 3rd, I have the flatted 7th. I need the 6th, because remember the 13th is the same as the 6th. Well, I can get a 6 right here. The problem is I need that flatted 7. I don't need the 5th. So if I'm looking for a 6th, if you think about it, what comes after 5? 6. And it's a whole step higher, which would be 2 frets. So then I have a chord which we could call a 13th. It's not officially a 13th because it doesn't have the 9th, but it gets the sound of a 13th. And that's an embellishment. Sometimes it's called a dominant 7 add 6 chord. Now, I could get a 9th if I wanted, because right above it is the 9th. There's the root. So if the root is here, the 9th is 2 frets higher. So here is a 13 with a 9. There's all kinds of things I can do with this. I can take this 13, I can flat it. That would be a dominant 7th with flatted 13th. Continue going. I have the dominant 7, flat 5, Now all of these voicings are forms, and you'll find these forms along with many others I'm going to show you in lesson 10. But I don't want you to rely on them only as forms. It would be better if you thought of them as basically, this is just a dominant seventh chord, and all of these other tones are simply color. It doesn't change anything. Chord embellishment does not change the root of the chord, meaning the name. It also doesn't change the quality. If it's a dominant, it's a dominant chord, no matter what you put on it. If it's a minor chord, no matter what you put on it. If it's a major chord, no matter what you put on it. That's what an embellishment is. Substitution is something else, and we're going to talk about it later. But the root remains the same, and the quality remains the same. So you are absolutely free to get all of these sounds on the C7th chord, and there's so many more. Here's this. Here's the flat 13. Let me add a ninth to that. Let me add a sharp 9 and a flat 9. So here's the C7. Now suppose I wanted to add an augmented 11th. Well, that sounds so complicated. But you know that the 11th is the same as the 4th. Well, on the guitar, which is tuned in fourths, if this is the root, that's the 4th, 1.5 step higher is the... You could think of this as a dominant 13th with an augmented 11th. All of these sounds, some of them sound very strange, but they sound beautiful in the right context. One of the governing factors in your choice of an embellishment is the melody itself. Here's a very pretty sound, 13th, flat 9. And that resolves beautifully. All of these nice sounds. Here's a more strange sound, 13th. But that could be... It's all melodic. You should think of these tones as melodic embellishments. They're just melodies. Here, a suspension. A dominant suspension, you take the 3rd, you raise it to the 4th. How pretty. But what is it? It's all C7. Now here's the dominant 7. Here's dominant 7. I raise the 3rd to the 4th. Suspension. 13 and 9. Listen. Beautiful. Now I'm going to go to, I'm lowering that to the dominant 7, flat 13, flat 9. To resolve, and I'm going to show you about resolving it later. I could also go, but all of this is C7. And something else, I'm calling it, these are dominant embellishments. In the symbol, you don't have to say C dominant 13th. If you want to indicate a dominant embellishment of any kind, all that you need is the letter and the numbers. G9 is a G7. G9 flat 5 is a G7. G13 sharp 9 is a G7. G13 flat 9 is a G7. Okay, now these are the most commonly used voicings, and while you need to learn them, I'd like you to try to think of them as melodies and being more fluent, because you don't need to just stay in this one area. You know, as I said, there are 2 popular ways of playing this. This is one of them. I'm going to show you the other in a minute. And they're usually thought of as our 13th chords. And if as guitarists we just stick to that, we're going to be very limited. Pianists don't think like that. They think of the whole fingerboard, as we're going to do. Now, the other voicing, which is very common for dominance, is a second inversion chord. Here's a C7th with the 5th in the bass. Now, if I want to get a 9th, I don't need the root. All I have to do is raise the root to the 9, which is the same as the 2. So there's the 9th. There's the sharp 9, Foxy Lady chord, flat 9. If I want to go C7 to F, I've got C7 sharp 9, flat 9, F major 7. I have all of these notes. I have the 9, I have the sharp 9, I have the 5, I have the sharp 5. I could play a sharp 9, sharp 5. I could play a 13th because that's the 6th. I could play the same chord, play the 13th chord and flat the 9. Here's a suspension. I raise the 3 to 4.